The item is specifically included on the agenda as an item upon which action may be taken. The committee chair may limit public comment to 3 minutes per person. Okay, next up is approval of the January 29th, I can't believe it was that long ago already, audit committee meeting. And we have very thorough notes. So, did anyone have any comments or discussion on the minutes from that meeting? Yeah, ready for motion?
I move to approve the minutes of January 29th, 2019.
All those in favor?
Need a second first.
I'll second.
You really are
Moving
keeping
things
to this
along.
quick.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, passes. All right, adoption of the agenda for today. Any comments or discussion on the agenda for this afternoon's committee meeting? Look good? Okay. So, like, we don't need to approve that. Okay, it's adopted. Okay, meeting item 6A. Up for possible action, discussion, and possible action regarding the monitoring review and closure of the internal audit findings and recommendations included in the audit findings tracking report, and provide recommendations to the Board of Supervisors to close completed findings and/or recommendations. And this one's Sherry. Good afternoon,
Thank you,
Sherry.
Mr. Chair. Good afternoon. And you're correct, it does seem like that meeting was just yesterday. So this is going to be a really quick item. There's only one item that I want to discuss on this. I talked to Ms. Bagwell before the meeting, and she had a great suggestion. I'm going to color code the ones we're going to discuss in yellow. So you don't have to read the whole thing every time. You know the ones that we're going to discuss. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay.
Making our job easier. Thank you.
I'm trying to. Yeah, we're trying. So, so the one I want to talk about is the number 1 on the capital projects process review. And this is where Public Works is going to create a checklist of, procedures for each, project, I guess. Yeah, and so they've done this for storm and water and different CIP project types. The one last thing is the facilities. So they're estimating that one last one won't be done until February 2020. So I'm gonna leave it up to you guys. We've recognized the finding, we have a process. We've almost completed, there's just one last little section of the checklist that we have to complete. Do you guys want to close this or just leave it until February of 2020?
Yeah, go ahead.
So, two avenues of thought there. One, will they just take care of it? Or two, what do you use to make sure it did happen? So I tend to lean to leaving it just for the sake of you can make sure it doesn't get missed.
Okay.
And that you still hold them accountable, but I don't know that we need a lot of discussion about it. And so I'm also comfortable with us closing it at our end administratively and leaving it on your list to ensure it happens. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I don't want it to get lost in the transition. I don't know that I need to see it again.
That makes a lot of sense. My only thought was, we've been moving towards getting these things closed and not leaving them open for over a year.
Right.
So I've seen, we had the finding, the recommendation, and we're implementing that. We've obviously done it for most things. There's just this one little piece lagging. So I'm more than happy to leave it open if that's the direction of the committee, or we can close it and leave it on myself to make sure it gets done.
Right.
Thoughts? Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I think we should probably keep it on there. I mean, that's the whole thing until it doesn't,
Done.
yeah. So that way it's clear. Otherwise, it's very easy as
Get lost.
supervisor. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Leave it on.
All right, anything else, Sherry?
That's it. The rest of them aren't going to be done until June, July timeframe, so.
Okay, and so quite a few of them, if I remember correctly, were tied to the new ERP implementation. How's that going? Are we on track for the estimated live date and so forth?
We are in most items. Yeah, we're developing training classes and we're getting ready to get everybody up to speed and go live 7/1.
Great, great.
See how it goes.
Okay, well, then we can close a lot of these items.
Yeah.
Okay, appreciate it. All right, next item. 6B, presentation by Ide Bailey on the fire department overtime agreed upon procedures for the audit committee's consideration, discussion, possible recommendation to the board of supervisor. This would be Dan Carter.
Thank you very
afternoon.
much.
afternoon,
I think you guys,
Dan.
oh, sorry.
It's a good afternoon.
Oh, good afternoon. Thank you very much. You guys have been provided our report in advance. A lot of this stuff we talked about in depth and at great length at the January meeting. I think we were tasked with trying to take a look at the mutual aid side and see how much of that overtime was actually being reimbursed by federal or other state and local agencies. So we did follow up with the fire department and add that piece in here. You can see that a lot of that overtime that we were talking about, not all of it, and obviously it shifts from year to year depending on how the fire season goes. But a lot of that overtime is reimbursed through the mutual aid process. Any questions or comments on that piece?
Well, just in general, a comment. I don't know that it's as much as I was expecting.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yeah, I think there was a lot more, yeah, not as much as I was expecting. I thought it was a much higher percentage.
And so basically the difference between the budgeted overtime and the actual overtime, that's that where we get to that 9% for FY17 and 30% for FY18. So that's kind of the shortfall of what that additional overtime is not covered by mutual aid. But I mean, that's a valid point. I think the report definitely points out that there is a lot of overtime. As we discussed at the last meeting, there are certain policies or, items in the collective bargaining agreements that make that necessary almost. And we did find, as we went back to the fire department to talk to them, that they did have a very well thought out analysis of those positions and what it would take to limit overtime, and we didn't recalculate or come up with our own calculation on our own because it seemed like they had done a really good job determining that. But in that, I think it's 6 additional positions you would need in order to, you can't just hire one more person to take the burden off of the overtime. It would be 6 additional positions. It seems like we're kind of at break even right now with that. I mean, the amount of overtime that you're paying could probably fund additional positions, but there's other probably non-financial aspects that go into that decision-making process. So that is one of our recommendations, is just to continue to look at that analysis and maybe a little more coordination between the fire department and the finance department, and just making sure that that cost benefit is there for paying the overtime versus hiring additional firefighters.
Yeah, is there some kind of, in part of the analysis, is there some kind of advantage to, rather than hiring a person that you're going to have on for a while and continue maintain it, that they have the overtime, that they go ahead with the overtime, and it's not that much of a cost benefit to get additional firefighters for that position. It's a complicated type. It's not that quite that simple, and with the contracts and everything, I think bottom line, we're looking at what is the most efficient and costly way to go about this, and don't want to be recommending changes if it turns out it causes other problems. So I don't know if you can speak on that, but what is the recommendation to pursue looking at getting additional positions or not?
I don't think that's our recommendation. I mean, our recommendation is to continue to consider it. I think the fire department has determined that the way it's being run now is proper, and there's nothing glaringly obvious that says that that's incorrect, so.
Sean Slayman, Fire Chief. Just to kind of clarify, from a fiscal point of view, it is less expensive to provide overtime. Overtime is 150% exactly. A new employee salary and benefits, I don't have the exact numbers, but it runs about 160 to 165. The benefit of additional people, and it was highlighted also in the report, is that tends to reduce the employee's additional hours of working, which can reduce injuries, can reduce sick leave. So there are some cyclical effects of adding additional personnel, lighten the load or the burden. But strictly from a fiscal point of view, it is cheaper to utilize overtime than it is to hire additional personnel.
Has it been considered too, as far as, and I don't know if it's being utilized now, volunteers to kind of like help with some of that? Is that a possibility? Because I know in some departments, they relying heavily on volunteers to help keep the costs down and to maybe make up some of those gaps.
So volunteers, certainly on the West Coast, is a dying tradition. They are mandated by OSHA standards to maintain the same level of training hours as well as equipment and certifications as a professional firefighter. And then with the significant call volume, it's not realistic for a volunteer to leave their occupation to go to a call or to come in after hours. It wears them out and burns them out and ends up costing more in the long run. So the use of volunteers, and specifically to this area, has declined significantly. And nationally, recruitment and retention of volunteers is probably one of the greatest challenges in the fire service. It's just not there anymore.
Hey, Sean, thanks for coming in. Question on when you look at this, over $750,000 overtime, what are the drivers? Is it just like a shortage of staffing people, or is it, that we have actual calls and so forth to go out on? Is it just?
It is a mixture of events. So when we look, I became fire chief in March of 2017. Okay. So fiscal year 18 represents under my watch, and I can speak to the summertime. We had a drastic shortage of fire personnel. We were down 8 positions, a couple for long-term injuries, and several had retired or had resigned and left to go to other occupations or other organizations. We run a regional fire academy that's held twice a year, once in the fall, once in the spring. That academy runs 12 weeks. So your lag time from a vacancy occurring to bringing them onto a fire engine at a minimum is 4 months. And that's rushing the fact. So summertime is our highest expenditure of overtime by month, and that is tied to vacations as well as it's wildland fire season, so significant overtime costs there. Most of that is reimbursed as reflected in the report. So overall, it is a mixture of we have we'd allow 2 personnel off per shift. There's 3 shifts on the fire department. They work a 56-hour work week, so the normal work hours is 40 hours, so a firefighter works 56. They are not entitled to any overtime until they work above 52 hours in that work week by the Fair Labor Standard Act. It's one of the only professions where overtime doesn't kick in at 40 hours in a work week. It kicks in at 52. So we have sick leave, we have injury leave, we have vacancies, and then you have vacation. And then there are a small portion of our overtime is through generated through training opportunities or advancement and educational promotional opportunities. But the majority of it is filling positions on the line through our minimum staffing policies.
I can tell you that in 18, they had around $1.4 million in overtime, and I believe that's kind of what started this whole process. This year, it looks like they're going to come in at under 1.1 million, less than 1.1, just having fully staffed. Being down those 8 people really hurt us.
To manage the, you said in the summertime, there's the greatest need, and there's also vacations and also to the wildfires and everything else that typically happens then. Did you have any kind of policies, in fact, that kind of like determines like when people can take their vacations? I know, for example, in my industry, you don't take vacations in certain months of the year because it's very busy. And I'm wondering, is there anything that's being done to address that so it mitigates the impact of overtime on the budget?
No, and not currently. The collective bargaining agreement allows for 2 people off any day of the week on the shift. And we run with a minimum of 15 personnel, and then there are 17 assigned to each shift. So we have 2 additional firefighters to fill in those vacancies.
So that's all part of the contract. I'm kind of wondering, when you go into contract negotiations, though, if there's a matter of recognizing how much that's costing, and work that in there, because that, we're looking at these numbers, and I'm a little concerned there's a big cost there, and I don't know if that's ever been negotiated as far as, well, the union may be asking for a particular thing, but showing the offset of having, being able to pay for that with overtime that's possibly could be averted and reduce the budget there. So, I don't know, this is probably getting a little bit outside of our thing, but who typically negotiates from the city of the contracts?
The human resources.
Office
Liaison.
and the
Yeah.
human resources,
Okay.
and then the board of supervisors.
Yeah.
It's on.
And
I'm green.
just to follow up on that,
Contract goes through 2021. The current firefighter contract goes through 2021, I think, so we
Yeah.
can negotiate it anytime soon.
And just to follow up on that, the summertime is the greatest, where we consecutively or we continually have 2 people off, and that's related to families and vacations and such. The majority of outside overtime for mutual aid events is reimbursed as reflected. Roughly a third of our overtime budget every year is tied to reimbursed mutual aid events.
Well, I don't know, I guess there needs to be a note, and that's probably why we're looking at it now. We know we probably can't do anything now because of the contract, but when the contract does come up, I think, all these factors need to be taken a look at and considered. Because, I mean, I'd be kind of curious to know, with, how that could be adjusted and how much could be, saved from that. Because when you're talking like over $1 million budget, I'm sure there's some places where we can do to kind of reduce that amount.
I would like to take a look at this finding or the recommendation, because part of that contract is after 51 firefighters, if we hire more, we have to give them 3 days off instead of 2.
Which will exasperate the problem.
Right, but,
Especially in the summer.
right, but does 6 employees solve that? Because I looked at the cost of a firefighter. It's about $650,000 to $900,000 for to hire 6 new firefighters, depending on what level you hire them. So if there's no overtime and we hire 6 firefighters, we would save money.
But then I guess as Sean was saying, though, there would be other costs involved where that would probably go over and, okay.
Right. So it's like somebody said, it's very break even right now.
Yeah, historically, over let's say the last 5 years, I'm just gonna wonder if we just had a few bad years here. Is it typically pretty consistent from year to year, the amount of overtime over more than the past 2 years?
I think it's increasing simply because we don't increase the budget. We kind of are trying to hold them at $775,000 in overtime. And so obviously the firefighters are getting raises and they're increasing each year, and we're not increasing the budget to match
Okay.
that. So,
And that's part of our recommendation, our first recommendation that we provided, because that budget number has stayed flat. And some of that is, what we found is there's not a lot of detail in telestaff to determine what that overtime is used for, whether it's training or the mutual aid, or there's just one category. But then also in trying to determine a more realistic budget, I mean, I know it's hard to estimate, but just leaving it flat for the last several years isn't doing anybody any good as far as trying to determine what it really needs to be. So I think both of our recommendations are really surrounding just the fire department working with the finance department and coming up with, good estimates and and that cost-benefit analysis to make sure that those numbers are there for everyone to make the right decisions going forward.
So, thanks, Dan. One follow-up question, Sean. Back on the drivers, and then I started looking at the various positions. So, 2 captains, overtime pay exceeded the regular by 90%. 5 was over 70, and then there were driver operators and firefighter operators. The drivers in the employee mix on overtime, is it all totally due to vacation? Like maybe the captains have more accrued vacation, so then we're short-staffed and we need to bring in additional staff or overtime staff to cover those vacations? Is that?
That would be partially accurate, absolutely. So your captains are the senior level person on the fire engine. Those tend to be your most senior people in the fire department. And with that, they earn more leave time. It's based on years of service, how much you acquire per paycheck or per month. And so they tend to be the ones that earn more vacation time, therefore take more vacation time.
Okay. And then do we take that into account in the city budget when and I know this, I know the last time we negotiated this contract, but obviously you need a certain number of captains to cover all the shifts. You think just simple math would be able to go through and tell you how many captains you need in order to not incur any overtime in the captains based on the accrued vacation or, leave policy that the captains have earned, and then staff the department to that level so that we're not incurring these overtimes.
We have a position control where the Board of Supervisors approves those positions. So, I mean, it's kind of up to the department and how they feel it should be structured in order to avoid overtime or whatever the case may be, to bring those positions to the board and say, this is what we want to do to reduce overtime or whatever the case may be. We budget based on the positions the board has approved.
Okay.
So the mix of the staff is determined by the department? No?
By the board,
No,
by the contract in the board.
Amended by the department.
Oh, okay. So the supervisors approve by type of position. Got it.
But that's more for the base salary versus overtime, right?
Okay.
One other question, is there a ongoing monitoring of these costs? And just as you mentioned, the cost benefit analysis, do we have systems or processes in place to track that on an ongoing basis?
So we track and ensure that overtime is accurate on a daily basis. We work with finance and the city manager's office on a regular basis to kind of determine where our costs are and where fiscally we can conserve or be more efficient. But again, when we look at if you ask me from a professional level, I'd like to see us have some more firefighters. That would significantly reduce our overtime, and that would reduce some of the wear and tear on our firefighters themselves. The cost is more than what we are paying in overtime to do that.
And finance looks at the overtime, 3-4 times a year, just to make sure they're not gonna exceed the budget by more than we expect, and usually they are. So we're usually on the phone with them, calling them, seeing if there's anything they can do to reduce that, and what's going on with wildland fires and how much revenue we're gonna get, and playing around with those numbers too.
Are we also looking at the fact that we can't judge wildfire season, that's a wild card, but we're growing as a city as we, add more housing projects. And I'm not a fire guy, but I gotta believe you put more houses somewhere, that's gonna cause more calls. So are we looking at that as well as we forecast? I know you say you need more fire people, but the budget is going to, or the overtime is more expensive, but if we have just what is critical mass, I guess, where we say, I don't care about the overtime, we gotta have more people now?
So yes, our call volume has been increasing for the last 6 to 8 years at a 3 to 5% per year rate. So we're in this month or this year alone, we're running about 3 to 4 more calls per day than we did previously, and that's really without growth. Have been working with the board. We've made some initial presentations discussing future needs for for the fire department, an additional station as well as additional staffing. Tentatively approved for this budget and hopefully formally approved this next meeting will be a master plan for the fire department where we will look exactly at that, and we will evaluate our staffing levels and the efficiency of those staffing levels as well as the call volumes. And so a lot of that is based on what we call unit hour utilization. There's a certain trigger nationally, basically when over 30% of your time is dedicated to emergency incidents. That is usually the trigger where it identifies the need for additional resources. And so we will have that done hopefully a couple months into the fiscal year, have that report completed and be able to have a more of a 360-degree look at the fire department and how we're operating and where our efficiencies are and what our future needs are.
Sure.
So Ken, just in general, a question on the overtime. So I'm a firefighter, can't fill in for a captain, but can a captain fill in for everything down the line?
They can.
So is any of the overtime, you see where I'm going here?
Yes.
Do you ever have it where there isn't any firefighters that'll work the overtime or whatever, and you end up paying at a captain rate for firefighter work?
On occasion, that does happen, yes.
That's where it's more expensive, and I kind of be interested in how often does that happen? You don't know?
I don't have an exact number for you. That's
That's where it's really expensive, is when you have
Correct.
to use
Correct.
a higher level position to do the work of a lower level position.
And that had been a continuous practice and something we're looking at.
Thank you. I wanna
I'm
know.
not necessarily a big supporter of that either.
Okay, so that you're looking at, thank you. I just
are.
need to know that
We
you're,
are. And
that it tends to,
yes, and I'll add to that,
thank you.
prior to me coming here, we didn't have a limit on how many days in a row you can work, and we've instituted that. We've worked with the labor group on that, and so we limit the amount of consecutive days or consecutive hours that they can actually work now, which was a first big step, and then that is a future step that we're looking at.
You don't see that as that's not in the bargaining agreement, so that's just policy that you can help.
Because it's a past practice, I would say it'd be best to meet and confer at that point. I'd have to refer with legal on that to get the true, is it a true meet and confer item? But my style would be more to meet and confer with them, and
Anyway, thank you.
there-
I just think that
we
that's
have a good
another
relation.
avenue we can look at. And I look at solely for the residents and the taxpayers. I want the work done, but I want it done by the most appropriate level that I have to pay for.
I agree.
That's probably the right way to say it.
I agree.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Dan, one other question. We talked briefly about, or we talked about this at the last meeting. The reimbursement, when our city department gets called out to fight for other organizations, the reimbursement process, did you guys, I remember you talking about that. I don't remember what conclusion you came to as far as how.
Yeah, or that was something we hadn't done at that point, and that
Okay.
was something we've done since then.
Okay, how did
And
the-
found that overtime is documented very well and tested as part of this process. You know, that's what we used to make sure that these overtime hours were appropriate and approved. And so there are logs and lots of data to support that. We did not find any inappropriate overtime being charged to the city. Everything was approved in advance, and we had one super minor kind of isolated incident that we called it, where someone had earned 3 hours more than they were supposed to. But other than that, we found internal controls in all those areas to be functioning appropriately.
In general, the reimbursement process, the broader reimbursement process outside of overtime, was that reviewed at all?
No, we were specifically looking
Yeah.
at the mutual aid, reimbursement for those overtime hours.
Okay.
Chairman Ferguson, if I could add.
Sure.
Annually, we submit what we call a salary survey, so we give them the agencies where we have contracts with. So we have two major contracts for reimbursement. That's with the federal government, U.S. Forest Service, BLM, and then a secondary one with the state of California for Cal OES. And so we submit our salary surveys every year, so it takes, we present them what our captain's wages are, fully loaded in driver, operator, firefighter. In addition to that, additional reimbursements that come with that is depending on the contract, anywhere from a 12 to 18% administrative fee, which we charge on top of that. And then we also get reimbursed for the apparatus we sent. Depending on the type of apparatus is sent is how much we get, the reimbursement rates flex on that. But the firefighter, the salaries are updated annually with those contracts. So we get dollar for dollar.
Okay, great. Sure, go ahead.
So then in general, were you able to work with the sheriff's office on the computer system to be able to refine and get the necessary codes?
Yeah, we had actually done that prior to the audit. That was one of the things that I had requested. But we didn't have that for the 2 years that were audited. So when they asked, we were happy to say we had just implemented those, because that was one of my concerns is, great, we've got a big pot of overtime budget that's well over budget, but I want to break down so I can evaluate it a little bit better to see exactly what you're asking is where our high costs are and what areas can we
Any
address.
targeted area we
Correct.
could look at?
So training,
Okay, good.
I got the list, but several items are sub-documented now so that we have a better tracking
Billing
mechanism.
for a vacant position or
Correct.
someone that's sick?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Can I just ask one other? Sure. Just so that I can clarify something in the report, because I can read it two ways. More I look at it, and I thought, oh, just so the public doesn't maybe read it wrong. When I look in the background and you've got where the mutual aid reimbursements was $469,405. The next sentence though says overtime shortfall for mutual aid was 9% and 30%. You mean of the budget? We did get all our money back. It wasn't a shortfall of recovery. Do you see how that sentence kind of could read to someone?
Yes, so that, the math there is that, like, if we look at FY17 as an example, the 1.3 million that was budgeted, less the 772 that was budgeted, the difference between that and what was actually expended, of that, 50 or 91% of that is covered by that 469,101 that came in from mutual aid.
So you're just saying the budgeted overtime shortfall, there wasn't a shortfall in mutual aid? You're assigning a percentage of the
Yeah.
actual versus,
That was covered by mutual aid.
but you see what I'm,
Because the way I read.
and I'm not saying that we have to change something in here, but I'm concerned that this will be sitting out there as a public document, and it may lead people to believe that we have mutual aid agreements not paying their full boat.
Yeah, the way I read this is that we collected 70% of fiscal
Yes.
year 18. That's the way
Right.
I read this.
Yeah, you see what I'm
saying?
Yeah,
The language can be tweaked at this point, just to make it
Okay.
more clear.
I would love
Because it
that.
does say overtime shortfall for mutual
Yeah,
aid.
just
so,
the way it
Yeah,
reads, it
Not-
appears.
We were kind of saying that of the overage from,
Of the 700,000 you didn't budget that you had,
yes,
this
mutual aid was
9%.
only
9%.
90% of it.
I'm not so sure that sentence is necessary at all in
okay.
the report. I'm just wondering if you should just strike the sentence.
No problem.
I just don't find it, doesn't give the report value, it does the opposite.
I think we're more just in making sure that everything that we build, we collect it.
Right.
That's more
That's what I was
important, yeah.
after, that we're getting everything. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Okay. Other questions, comments, concerns? I appreciate it. Appreciate it, Dan. Thanks, Sean. Thanks on behalf of the, yeah, on behalf of the committee and citizens at large. I've had several, bumped into firefighters many a time up in the canyons doing fire prevention work, and super great guys, and we should be proud when we got a great fire department in this city, so thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so we need a motion for approval.
Oh wait, you have to ask for public comment. Even though there isn't anybody out
There's-
there, just ask for it on the record.
Any public comment?
Thanks. Okay.
Hearing none?
Okay, sorry. I'm gonna keep us legal, huh, Todd? Okay, habit on our part.
Okay.
I move to accept the report as amended from Ide Bailey and direct staff to work on the recommendations provided.
I second that.
Do we want to add to that, to reword that?
I did, as
Okay.
amended.
Okay, as amended, okay. Got it? Seconded?
Seconded.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Passes. Thank you. All right, next item is 6C, and this is a presentation by Bailey on temporary staff and agreed upon procedures for the audit committee's consideration, discussion, possible recommendation to the Board of Supervisors. And again, this is Ide Bailey presenting. Thanks, Dan.
Of course. So again, you guys have our final report. We talked about a lot of this at the January meeting. And just, so this is temporary staffing and the city's use of temporary staff and our review. This was a lot more, there's a lot more data to go through here as far as the contracts themselves, you know, the people that we looked at, and the policies and procedures of the city to make sure that those were approved and charged appropriately. Again, we found, you know, the city staff to be very knowledgeable about this and did come up with several recommendations. And I think we talked about it a little bit at the last one, just an overriding concern about FLSA and just making sure that the way or where that divide is between the temporary staffing agency and the city, making sure that whose responsibility it is to make sure that those people are properly classified if it was questioned. You know, a temporary staffing person who thought that they should have been an employee or vice versa. Just making sure that, because there is, based on the length of time and the number of projects and the number of hours worked, it did seem like there was some people that work very, very hard for the city on a temporary part-time basis. So just a recommendation more from a legal perspective. We are not, you know, legal professionals and glad that there are those people out there. Glad I'm not one of them. But yeah, just to get a determination on that and make sure that those relationships are being accounted for properly.
Are you saying that some incidents gave you pause enough to say we should ask? Okay, I wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
So you're on recommendation, or observation 1, right?
Yes.
And recommendation 1. Then it's pretty, I mean, it's pretty open-ended recommendation, right? Was it mainly just the FSLA considerations, or were there other legal considerations?
I mean, I think the primary consideration is that whether the person is truly an employee, even though they work for the city through a temporary staffing agency. So I think that's the determination. I think that could impact several things besides the FLSA. I mean, there's various NRS that are impacted, but the question is whether those people are truly employees, even though they come to the city from a temporary staffing agency.
So should that recommendation be worded that way, or do we want to leave it more open? It just says, you know, further evaluation by legal professionals on the legal risks identified from this audit, but we didn't list those.
Or just
Risks.
in the observation, we noted the employment relationship with the city and temporary
Okay.
employees. I mean, we can certainly change it how you see fit, but.
Well, I guess that's what I was asking. Your pause is on whether or not technically they could be considered an that the individual would have rise to make a claim that I've been on this temporary contract for 5 years, working 40 hours a week, every week for 5 years. I'm not a temporary employee and I should be subject to give me my PERS, give me my benefits, blah, 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 blah. So I think this one's pretty clear to say go get a legal opinion on the employment relationship on these instances to really what is the break point, right? I guess that's what you're really trying to say. What is the federal government and the state law where's that break point to say, nice try, you're going around the system using a contract. They're truly going to be declared an employee. That's the issue at hand?
Potentially.
Okay, so then I think this is clear.
But they are employees of a staffing agency, correct? Yeah.
Yes, they are.
So they're not independent contractors, they are employees, so that, again, yeah, I agree, there needs to be a legal analysis of this, because it's, I'm thinking from federal purposes, they're an employee, and you can contract, the question is if that would cause problems with the city, yeah.
I
All
don't,
these people are either former employees or subsequently hired as employees of the city as well, so.
I mean, I guess it would probably, there could be a lot of facts and circumstances to go into to determine. I mean, for example, it could be it's temporary because, is it budget constraints, or is it a matter of, they're not too sure how much longer they'll need that person, or are they just doing it for some other reason? So, yeah.
yeah, and I don't know if it's the same for governmental entities, but, I worked at one of the largest companies in the world, and when we had temps in, and believe me, we used a lot of them, but we had a cutoff of 12 months. If the person was there more than 12 months, we either had to let them go or hire them. So, but that was coming down from, that public company standpoint, and I don't know if it was a perception thing or a legal thing, I'm not sure, but we were told basically 12 months you had to make a decision. Is this person, employee, or are they, truly temporary?
So I guess after talking to legal, I guess what's going to come out as a recommendation is hopefully they'll be maybe reviewing what the policy is, or developing a policy is what we're really wanting here, is what is the policy and when is somebody no longer a temporary employee, and so.
I think that ties in with some of the other recommendations that we've got. I mean, just a formal citywide policy on temporary staffing would be a huge benefit, so.
Because I think the other consideration is, I think PERS comes into this, right? So is it a job that the city should have had that's a PERSable position, and we're getting around it by creating a contract? But there is, I think, one of the wiggles is gonna be, though, what you said, is because they are an employee, we're not contracting directly with them as a temporary. It's not a consultant type contract, but I don't know. I would just feel comfortable. So I'm okay with, what it says, or maybe we get a letter from PERS that says, nope, that's fine with us. It's our interpretation, what you're doing's A-okay. You don't owe us PERS.
Okay, Dan, next one.
And then, just a couple simpler ones, just consistent time tracking. I think we had talked about that there's a marathon timesheet that's used, but when we were reviewing them, we saw some inconsistencies in just the format of timesheets and what's reported, and just trying to use a consistent.
Honestly, that's concerning from a legal standpoint too. And when employees aren't did you see where places where people weren't actually recording breaks?
Yes.
Okay.
But we had talked about, no. It sounded
Yeah,
like no-
citywide, we don't record breaks. That's up to them. We pay the break. We do record lunch,
Lunch,
when they take their lunch, because that's not paid.
okay.
But breaks citywide, we don't record that.
Were there lunches that weren't recorded? People work 8-hour shifts without lunch?
That doesn't sound familiar.
I don't think so. I think the marathon timesheets that I've seen, the actual marathon timesheet does have an in and out before lunch and after lunch.
Okay.
And the employee signs it and we sign it, and it's got some disclosures. I think the concerning ones are more when they have a large project and they have 5 or 6 temporary employees on it. They're using more of a spreadsheet format with all of those employees, their in and outs, and their signature. So there aren't disclosures, it's just a different format, and I think that's the concerning piece. So I don't know, we'll have to discuss this internally, but I do like the idea of using the marathon timesheet no matter what. And if they want to attach that to the spreadsheet, that's fine. But no matter what, we do have that marathon spreadsheet with all the disclosures and the signature and everything.
Yeah, and then the question, with technology these days, it seems like there would be better technology out there for getting an actual electronic time punch.
Well,
Whether,
but these are temporary staffing.
It's not electronic.
Yeah, I mean, this is a marathon, it's a separate company, so we can't really dictate what their timesheets look like.
right, but we as a city can dictate
Can.
the requirements that we're requiring our subcontractors to do. And I've run into this multiple times in other companies, that when you get manual timesheets, they are not accurate, inherently not accurate, because people are just, I don't remember if I clocked in that or clocked out for lunch that day, and so forth. And when it comes to time tracking and you're dealing with, non-exempt employees, it's very important in the accuracy of this stuff so that we don't end up in some type of, class action lawsuit. So it's just a risk.
There is a place for both the employee and the supervisor's signature on the timesheets from Marathon.
Okay.
So if that gives you a comfort level.
I would say differently. I would say that we have a contract with potentially, I think, 4
We do have
of
4
these
different-
contractors, and I believe we can attach an exhibit that approves the particular timesheet, because I'd like to see a timesheet that says something like, I hereby certify that the above is true and correct. So I'm already a little bit leery a different way, that the way you protect both Marathon and the city is you have the person certify that this is true and accurate. He can't come back 2 years later and say, oh, no. And we're like, well, no, you said your timesheet was right. It's not a guess, it's not an estimate, it's not all that kind of stuff. And having it on a Marathon timesheet, or whichever vendor, means they're their employee. So I'm not in favor of using city different documented timesheet methodologies. I don't care if you create a spreadsheet that gathers them all up so you can submit something, but they need to be on the timesheet that we mandate from whichever company we use, because it's their employee, not ours.
Right.
If that makes sense, what I'm saying, that's another documentation that they're not our employee. But I do think, unless I'm wrong, and Todd can tell me, we can, in the contract, attach an exhibit for the timesheet and negotiate that with the vendor.
Yep, I don't see any reason why we couldn't work with the temporary staffing agencies to develop a acceptable timesheet.
To get the minimum standard, or say, your timesheet has to have at least these elements or whatever. Okay, because I think we could strengthen maybe some items, and if you're gonna go do the legal work a little bit, we can take that shot at the same time of improving the timesheet. Okay.
And the rest of these, the next 3 observations and recommendations are really policy. There's creation of policies to just track and limit and have some sort of analysis that goes into the thought process between these. When people leave as an employee and come back on a contract, making sure that there's the cost benefit of what they're paying. Marathon also has an administrative fee, or I'm not sure what they call it, administrative fee, I guess. So there is some additional expense for using the temporary staffing agency over and above, just a straight employment contract. So just making sure that departments, we found temporary staffing to be very department by department driven versus like an overriding citywide, management of that. So just a recommendation that policies are in place for, the analysis to be done and the hours to be watched and and training on those policies to make sure that the managers of those departments know what, at this level, the city's expecting of them when it comes to hiring temporary employees, if it ends up being how long they could be temporary employees. And having that out there and having training out to make sure everyone's on the same page.
I'm kind of curious, what departments are using temporary staffing the most?
It's the ones you'd think of, right? Parks and Rec, the temporary stuff, yeah. Yeah, I don't think we did an analysis department by department to see who was using it. We pulled a random sample of 77 employees across the city. Yeah.
That policy is already in the works. I reached out to Melanie to see if she could start a policy, and I think, 3 hours later, she sent it to me, and I was really shocked. So the policy is in the works.
How much, I guess, that other thing so that people recognize why we're even looking at this, it was growing. So I know for me, the budget just kept not being enough money, and we kept having to augment more money into these contracts and bring the contract back. So I think it's good that we're continually also, same thing that we did on the firemen, right? That you're constantly looking to say, are we making the right decision? And when should the person become a staff person? You have more control of the position when it's an actual employee. And there's a sweet spot, right? When is it less expensive, more expensive, better control, not as good as control? And so I think having a good set of policies where, I'll wait and see what they say, but, how often do we review it? And like you said, hey, nobody's going to be on temporary longer than, 12 months without human resources saying it meets one of these qualifications. Or somebody has to, not that never could someone be more than 12 months, because I hate to box us in that way, but that it takes a secondary look or approval.
Yeah, I think it's
to-
really going to be a position-by-position analysis.
Right.
Because if you're just hiring somebody to cover a maternity leave or a grant position that could go away, those are very different circumstances than if you're, hiring for a project that may not continue, but you probably will maybe need that staff in the future. So I don't know, it's going to be a interesting policy, I think, because it's got to fit in a lot of different needs of different departments.
Well, I know we had some on the temporary staffing, and I will say I definitely was a driver. That bothers me a great deal when I see somebody, and even though you're going to tell me it's a temporary project, but when a project lasts 5 years, that's not real temporary in my eyes, right? A project to me is a one and done. Anyway, we've had several employees in some areas, and I believe we still even have one today that's, 4, 5, 6 years somebody's been working somewhere. I don't see the temporary nature of that, so.
Dan, on observation number 4, just,
That'd be one of them. That'd be one of them.
just curious what the drivers are behind when a department lets a person go and then brings them back as a temp. Like what, were you guys able to identify a reason for that, or was it just a budgeting bucket item, or I'm
And it's
confused?
kind of across the board. This isn't a consistent thing that we found. There, of the 77 people we looked at, there was a handful that were either former city employees that were hired back, and not all of them were hired back at a cost greater than some were hired back at less than their salary. So it's not an overarching issue where people leave and then come back earning way more. But there are instances of that occurring that we found. No, we didn't go any further as to why. It's just we're reporting to you that there needs to be an analysis of what these temporary contract workers are paid and making sure that it's appropriate for the city.
Well, and probably the broader issue is a policy around it, right?
Yeah, I can tell you just in general, 99% of the time it's institutional knowledge. Somebody reaches their 30 years and retires, but there's this big project they're working on that needs to get done, and they know everything there is to know. So they pretty much have to beg that person to come back and help us. So that's kind of that's I think the majority of them. Not well, maybe half of them. I'd have to look deeper, but
But why was the person paid more than they even made in the job? I think that's the overlying, you look at this and go, wait a minute, they made more for their expertise when they left, and they're drawing their pension. and then drawing all of this at $35 an hour more? Or did the $35 just cover the, no, we have to pay the admin on top, right? I'm assuming that this was the individual's amount was $35, right? So why did we pay more?
Yeah, I think in this specific instance, it was for a very large project and we needed him. And paying this was actually a lot cheaper than going out and hiring an independent consultant to help do this project. So giving him a little more to beg him to come back and help us was cheaper for the city in this specific instance.
Yeah, and just, I mean, just in general, from an organizational culture and mindset, letting somebody get that much institutional knowledge that without training somebody to succeed them is a problem, right? They should be bringing along the next person behind them to take over that role and sharing that institutional knowledge and documenting the institutional knowledge so that the city doesn't get put in a situation where we have to bring somebody back because we don't know what they were doing. So,
Well, and then also on the policy, if we're, again, I'm assuming these are gonna be exceptions to the rule, right? They should be rare because we're doing the things right along the way. That I actually, potentially the policy should include something that proves to me what you just said. Because while I hear that we would have had to pay more, I'm not convinced. And I think often we think that's just the guy, that's it, right? We have to have him. I'm not so sure that's true either. And unless you go through an exercise of putting out a bid or putting a document out there that then comes back and you analyze it and say, hey, all the other ones came in $60 more, so the $35 that this guy's offering's the better deal. You know, that I have an actual paper trail that provides me, it's not anecdotal, it's not, well, I think, it's documented.
Yeah, this, I guess, went on for 4 years, and that kind of disturbs me. I mean, if this kind of gets around and people know about this, I mean, it's kind of like retirement extortion, So, it comes to retirement time, I really know what's going on, and I'm going to either take, yeah, exactly. So, I mean, this is just did a test selection, but I'm just kind of, I'm wondering if this has happened in other situations as well. That, again, that'd be disturbing. 4 years, $35 more an hour, unconscionable, actually. I think yeah.
At the time.
So
Again,
sometimes,
and that
sometimes
should be
it'd be,
another review, right? Should
Yeah.
we have hired an employee?
I mean, we don't know the details they do, but I guess I would really, strongly look at, even if it was at the same cost, I mean, for 4 years, get the other person, because you don't want to get around that you can do this type of a thing to the city, yeah.
And you also then still don't retain information.
Yeah.
Right? I'm like, wait, if we'd have hired another employee, it might have been slower on the project. I don't know. I just need more analysis because we also don't have the sharing of the knowledge, which we're trying to accomplish when we don't have them as employees.
Well, maybe, and again, we don't know, or this is all hypothetical, but I would think maybe have that person come in to help train and get somebody up to speed, so you are leaving it, somebody's gonna be around for a while, so you don't have to have him running that job for 4 years. So again, there's some things that need to be thought through, to do that, but for 4 years and paying that additional amount, it's like I said, that's disturbing.
I assume that there is a pre-approval for these temporary positions before they are filled. And that would have identified all the pros and cons that you were talking about, Lori.
I think that's why I originally asked for this audit. We do not have a city policy on some of these issues, but we will.
Yeah.
And I think, again, it'll be a case by case, and I don't want to rule any particular issue out because I want to do what's in the best interest of the city. You want to get the projects done, but I just want to make sure if certain conditions exist, that you have to have a higher authority looking at it to make sure that you've dotted every I and that you've done an actual exercise that says, hire a new employee, directly contract with the old employee, use a temporary, and that you actually document your thought processes and what did you use to, and go out to bid. And then compare the 3 or 4 options and that it's a documented. That's all I'm really interested in, is that we are transparent and document the processes. And then we make the best decision that's on behalf of getting the project accomplished and what's in the best interest of the taxpayers for that.
No, absolutely. And we've known this policy needed to exist for a long time. It's just, it's very difficult getting all the departments together. And I think this audit's really going to help direct us in the right direction.
I wonder if there's a capability to implement like a position requisition process, where for temporaries?
We don't have it for Marathon, no.
Okay. I was just curious, because then you could, somebody should go through and outline, hey, we're hiring this temporary for this position. This is the length of time the position will be required. This is a range of salary we think we're gonna need to pay. These are the, skill requirements we need, and then workflow it so that other people know that, hey, it has to go to HR, whether it's external temporary or an internal, it's still headcount, right? Goes to HR, goes to you, Sherry, or the city manager, depending on how much we're gonna spend for that position. But typically that's what you would see in a public institution. They would require, there would be some kind of requisition that you have to fill out in order to, almost like a purchase order, to have that temporary position filled. You wouldn't just have this bucket of, hey, I got,
Money in my budget.
$200,000 in my temporary budget, I'm gonna use it. So, if that's something we could look at in the policy, that would be, in my opinion, I think it would be helpful.
I can certainly discuss that with HR.
And I think maybe just to circle back around, because it's not in here, but I think the point was very valid, and I think it's an overarching concern that we see at a lot of places is the cross-training thing. I mean, I think if that was more generally accepted, maybe this wouldn't be such an issue. But it's also something from what we do with the rest of our clients that is concerning to me. I mean, you could walk into a finance department at, several entities and you see the aging workforce and the lack of people coming up that are learning, what they should to carry on the functions, not just in finance, but in, any department. Just, that's not an observation or recommendation that's kind of outside our scope, but I think it's very, very valid to continue to think about, because I think that would solve some of these problems and is important just for, it makes everyone's life easier when that knowledge transfers instead of just walks out the door. So.
Yep. Good point. Hey, Dan, on number 5, can you just expand on that for a minute? I'm trying to understand. There was an instance where the policy specific there was a.
We did find, there is a department that has a policy in place, Public Works, but no training on it. I mean, there's a policy. When we asked for it, they were able to provide it, but we just recommend that there be training on that policy so that.
Okay, so there was a policy, it wasn't implemented, or it wasn't used?
No, it was used. It just, staff weren't always knowledgeable about it, depending on who we talked to. Making sure that it was out there. And,
Okay. Okay, fair enough. Okay, other comments, questions, concerns on that agenda item? Hearing none. Any public comment? Hearing none, surprisingly. Do we have a motion on this item?
I'll move to accept the report back from Ide Bailey on temporary staffing as presented.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. It passes, thank you. Okay, next item on the agenda, 6D. Discussion and possible action to identify and discuss and provide recommendations to the Board of Supervisors on projects to be performed by the internal audit for the period ending June 30, 2020. And then, Dan, you're gonna be talking about possible recommendations.
So we did talk at length again about, we had finished our risk assessment and
Yep.
brought potential audits to this group at the January meeting. And I think we prioritized 3 or 4 items that we thought we could get going on. Some of them, a handful of them were wait until after the new ERP system is in place. And I think as a group, we agreed that that made the most sense. There were 3, I think, that we could get going on right away. And we are not into the 1920 year yet. I guess we never really talked about whether they were whether we should prioritize them into the 1819 year and get going on them now. There were some projects on the original proposed schedule that we had brought to the audit committee, but not talked about after the risk assessment. They just seemed a little less pertinent after the risk assessment process. A couple of them, we as a firm did some a separate consulting engagement kind of over contracts and grants for a particular department that requested it. So just wasn't sure if, just getting direction from the audit committee, if we wanted to go back and hit on some of these that maybe now are less pertinent, but they were in the original plan, or if we can push some of these 1920 projects into the I think some of them we could have done by the end of FY19.
Where do we stand right now in the budget for the current fiscal year?
I think we've billed to date about 65,000 out of the 110 that's budgeted.
We got money to spend.
I'd say get going on it.
Question on one. I have just a general question in talking with some other staff members and things, and I think we did one, I don't know, many moons ago, but does it behoove us every so often to do validation on insurance premiums? I mean, the city spends a lot of money in insurance and dependent care and all of that type of stuff. Does it behoove us to make sure we're properly tracking and getting updates into the insurance company if someone, I don't know, gets a divorce, if people pass away? I'm just wondering if it's a huge budgetary expense. Do we ever find that is anybody ever actually auditing it against and saying, hey, wait a minute, Johnny sent his paperwork in and yet we paid 2 more months of premiums on a family coverage when it should have only been single or things like that? I don't know. Is that something we should look at?
Every year I try to do a little audit of the benefit plans, at least 1 month, just to make sure that everybody that we're paying for is an actual employee. And there are little errors. I was not able to do that audit this last year because of the ERP and everything else going on. But I don't think it'd be a bad idea to have an independent person come in and
Just
do
a
it.
thought that it's a
just to
large expenditure item. Try to hit one.
Just to clarify, it's employee insurance and
Health
benefit
insurance,
related? Okay.
Yeah, we pay a lot. Well, and that everybody that selected the just that everything is aligned properly. And that if there's any safeguards that we need to add, or is there, I know once we had things on, people still had access to their computer passwords and things after they left, right? It's the same type of thing. Are we making sure the insurance is getting cut off and we're not paying a month of premium that we shouldn't pay? Because I don't know, what is it? $1,000. It's expensive per month, the insurance premium. So
Yeah,
just
the
to
other-
make sure we have all our safeguards and policies and practices or is there any other best practice we could add to that?
There's risk issues there too, like making sure we're in compliance with COBRA. Stuff like that. I don't know if that's ever anything. Have we ever done an audit of HR administration?
I can't think of one. The last time we did.
It's,
I personally have audited them, but I'm an internal employee, so that's not.
But I'm just saying that's a huge nexus area.
no, that's a great area to think about. There's a lot of risk in there and there's risk of overpayments. So,
Lori had asked me for ideas, and at the time she caught me off guard. I was like, I don't know, but but after thinking about it, and I did talk to some of my staff, and And I don't believe a cash handling audit has been done for about 5 years.
It was 2014.
2014.
Yeah, so it's 2020.
Yep.
Plus, we're implementing a new system, Tyler. So 2020 might be a good year to make sure our cash handling procedures are still in check, especially with the new system coming on. It's just an idea.
There were, if I remember correctly, there were a fair amount of findings on that review too, so I think that's,
Yeah, we even had
cash
the
is always
treasurer's
important
office
to
did
keep
that,
track of.
did that training and all that. Put that little video together, if I remember. Yeah, but still, I think cash handling, you should hit every, probably 5 or 6 years anyway. What else is on the
Yeah,
list, Dan,
My,
that we could move?
So yeah, if it's okay, so you guys approved the 1920 audit plan, but it sounded like there were some key things. We had talked about the tax exempt property audit. These were kind of the priorities that I wrote down as we were leaving: the social media audit, the citywide audit of fee structure, and the budget monitoring. Those were the top 4 that I think we came up with out of our meeting last time. And then, but that was our FY 1920 plan, but it seemed to make sense to us to get going on those now. I think we could get a lot of that knocked out, maybe even before the end of 19, and then add these new ones that we're coming up with to the 20 plan. And I know we had talked about needing to, someone was gonna reach out to the treasurer internally and make sure he was comfortable as an elected official that we could come out and do an internal audit of that tax exempt property. I don't know if
With the
that.
assessor and treasurer?
yeah,
Yes, yeah. I think that was more of an internal thing versus me calling and asking whether he was okay with that. So I just wanted to get approval from the audit committee that we push some of these 2019, 2020 projects into the 18-19 timeframe and try and get going on them
hot,
now.
yeah, hot buttons for me, I mean, accounts payable and purchase card administration are always areas that are prone to error. And, I wouldn't be opposed if we just said, hey, we're gonna take, 20 AP items and 20 P card sample every year.
Yeah.
And, because we did a real limited accounts payable review last year, I think it was. And there was a couple of findings, and it just, to me, it's worrisome. That, in the limited scope that we did, the errors that we found. So those are always, cash, P cards, accounts payable are always hot areas that we could, kind of set up like some kind of mini audit around
Absolutely.
to do annually.
We did discuss that, and I think the ERP system ended up being the question of, let's process in that for 6 months and hit it maybe December, January 2020, maybe. Yeah.
Well, which projects do you think we could move forward that we wouldn't really want to wait for the ERP to come online
I
for?
think that tax exempt property audit is probably doable now without, and correct me if I'm wrong. It sounded like the IT department and legal were interested in the social media, which was more of a upfront assistance best practices, and then come back 6 months and see if it's actually working.
I like that one too.
And then the fee structure, I think probably is doable now without, I won't tweak in the ERP system.
Well, and I know that on the fee structure one, that Parks and Recreation is looking, so I'm not so sure if we could hurry up on this one, that you can help them with the best practice and an alignment and really getting out there. And I know part of it is even being able to compare to others, which is difficult time for staff to be able to get out there and say, I know one of the things at the Park and Rec Commission, we were trying to keep things like at 50-50, it's 50% by the user group and 50% by the general fund, that's funding things, and to try and keep that consistent. But what happens is the fees stay for 20 years and the 50-50 is long and been eroded. So, and I know we're looking for the rifle range to put some fees in, so maybe if we can pull the fees and tax exempt, would we have enough money to do those two if we move them forward?
Yes, I believe so.
You know what I mean? So maybe those two would be, and again, they won't impact the ERP or the work that's being done there. And then for next year, we could add on the insurance premium, human resource stuff, maybe cash handling and yeah, so, which is more important, social media or the tax exempt properties? I'm gonna think social media, actually.
Mr. Chair, on the social media policy, I will note that the IT department has asked the DA's office to revise the social media policy. I don't know whether it would be a better idea to wait until that policy is done and then do an audit, or to do an audit ahead of revising that policy to give us input on how to revise the policy.
Well, do you want help with best practices and some other policy examples? Is that something you can do, Dan? Is help with a best policy? They can write one and then you can test it,
That
that
would
it
take a lot
implemented?
of budget upfront to pull that together, and then
Would that
come
be of
back and
help?
audit it.
That would certainly be of help as
So
far as
the-
revising the
maybe the
policy.
fee one and the social media would be, again, that we're using our money, our audit money wisely too, is what's of greatest benefit that the audit would provide. And so if it'll help that team and this one will help that team, you guys think?
Yeah, I think, to me, that makes sense. Best practices are always helpful.
Sorry, one more time. We're gonna do best practices for social media and fee structure,
Yes.
and then see where we get to, and then maybe come back on the tax exempt.
Yeah.
Right, see how much money you, right.
And I'll make sure, I think I have an email from Dave and Gail, but it's kind of old, so I don't remember what it said. I'm sure they probably have no problem with it.
For the tax exempt.
Yeah,
Oh, perfect, yeah.
that's the treasurer and the assessor. I'm sure I reached out to them. I just don't remember what the email said at this
No
point.
worries.
Sorry.
Yeah. And kind of on an ongoing basis, because we've brought back our audit plans, our actual audit programs to this committee in the past, just to make sure we weren't missing anything. Not meeting, I mean, we meet quarterly. Is there a better way to make that happen? I know I can't email them out to the group and get everyone to weigh in on it with open meeting law, but just to keep things moving a little quicker, not that every quarter we stop and wait and get, the plan approved. If there's something we can do to make sure that the committee's comfortable with our procedures up front is a benefit. I think it really worked well with the fire and the overtime. I'm not sure how that would work, but just to be able to pull together our procedures, get approval on them and get going on them before this committee meets again.
Yeah, I mean, my input on, it's a fair point because we're kind of slowing down everything by 2 or 3 months, right? The ones that are on deck for the rest of this quarter, at least from my opinion, the fee audit's that's about as straightforward of an audit as you get. And then the best practices on social media, again, you guys probably have more insight to that than any of us could provide.
So we're comfortable with just letting Sherry agree on these two, that we would just authorize, or we're comfortable as a committee letting Sherry agree to the procedures on
Yeah,
these
and
two?
I mean, in the longer run, I'm not sure what the
I think
fix
it's
is.
dependent on the type of audit, but considering what these are, I'm comfortable with that, right?
Well, and then maybe in July, when we bring back the 1920 budget and have all of them laid out, we could bring back up some agreed upon procedures with those. Do you think you could have the agreed upon procedures recommended
For these two.
for the 1920? Yeah, for the next one.
Oh, yeah, for the ones
next
coming up.
For the, yeah.
Absolutely, yeah.
Then you guys could tweak them and we could just do the whole year at once.
That's a good way to put it.
And we can come back with our findings and some recommendations, but maybe in draft form. And also, there was stuff some unanswered questions when we met in January, and we were able to follow up on some of that stuff. So we can come back and, have the projects done and have our findings, maybe not in a formal report, but enough to say, here's what we found, and if there's any other,
Take an
issues
extra
that
look.
come up. Yeah.
Okay,
I know one thing that's been brought up in the past was, now that the public guardian's been here for 9 months or so, we talked about giving her like a year and then auditing, re-auditing her. So I don't know if that's maybe a potential audit for 1922, maybe towards the end of the year.
I really think that one's better the following year, so
in
that there's a
2021.
clean. I've really thought about that one a lot and just really think there was a lot of law changes that I know. And I know we're actually working on a change in the public guardians legal because we're switching to the DA's office. And we just did that in the budget. So I'd really like to let the DA and the public guardian work on any final policies and get all that ironed out because we're changing from the lawyer from RSVP.
Okay,
So
okay.
I think it's hard to audit well, not hard, but it's a little more difficult to try and say, well, we're fixing that, we're working on that, we're changing who's and the processes. So I think if we let them know, really work hard through like July or August, because the next year we're gonna be coming back into the public guardian.
Okay.
We just gave the DA's office some money. A position. But you get 1 year, Todd, 1 year.
I do know the DA's office has been working very closely with the public guardian.
Right.
hey, I did have one question, again, on timing. This is for us as a committee. The minutes come out like the week before the next meeting. I'm used to getting board minutes like within a week or so after the meeting so that it's fresh in my memory, because even when I was reading these, I was like, wait a minute, did I say that? And I can go back and watch the video and verify, yeah, I did.
that's what you did.
But is there a way we could get the minutes out quicker after the meeting so that it's fresh in our memory? No?
By statute, we have 30 days, and so we can get them within 30 days, for sure. And I can,
Do you guys
my
see any,
best to get 'em
if I'm the only one that sees benefit in getting them sooner, no?
No, we need to do that. I think that would be good.
Okay. If it's possible, we'd
I
like
mean, she just emails us out the draft minutes.
draft minutes,
Right.
this, as soon as they're done after the meeting.
Could she do that? Because we couldn't comment back then for corrections, right? We would just save all the corrections for the meeting.
next
But at
meeting.
least it would be fresh in our mind.
I'm not sure off the top of my head how that would work and all the legalities involving it. I would have to go look at the statutes and verify and talk with the clerk's office as well.
Get them in advance on any meeting
Yeah.
that I do.
Basically, all I'm
We
asking
can
for
look
is
into
can we get the draft minutes sooner than 2 or 3 months after the meeting?
Right.
Because by that time,
we
You know.
can certainly have them to you within 30 days, and I'll do my best to get them sooner than that. We have, as you can imagine, quite a number of
I'm sure.
committees that we staff. And so I'll do my best, but that's the best we can do, is certainly
Okay.
within 30 days. And like you said, if there's a question, there's always the video to back it up, or
Right.
call me, or whatever you need.
okay, thank you, appreciate it. All right, 6E brings up the next topic, next meeting. And we usually go in July. July's gonna be fun, first month with the new and improved and
Hopefully Sherry makes it.
much.
I don't know if I go right to fun, but yeah.
Go lives
might
are always
develop a
fun.
Twitch by
You never know
then,
what's gonna
but
happen until you
it'll
go
be all
live. I'm joking. I don't know, I would think, for me personally, the second half of the month is better. That first couple weeks of July is always busy with stuff around the 4th.
Yeah, we're going live, so the later half of the month would definitely work for finance better too. Does that work for you, Dan?
I'm out of town the whole week of July 22nd, but other than that, fairly flexible.
With the 16th.
I can do the
How
16th.
about the 18th?
I cannot, you're not gonna get this room.
Oh, that's the,
Board day.
okay,
Yeah, Tuesdays are audit committee days.
okay.
Yeah. It's like, new.
So
Although this
is
might be
anybody
more-
opposed to the 30th?
30th could be hard for me.
Okay.
16th is doable. Everybody? Okay.
So 1 PM the 16th for audit?
Yeah, does 1 PM work? Okay.
I'll see what I can, I mean, that's
That
gonna
our
be
normal
really
time?
tough for me because I'm going live and then I gotta get all the information together to get to you that same week that I go live. So I'm just really concerned about that, the timing of that.
We do early August?
I was gonna say, would you rather do,
I'd rather do the
August
first week in
6th?
August, yeah.
The 6th.
August 6th works for me as well.
1 PM? Does it work for you, or? Yeah. Ernie's, his fingers are doing the walking over there to see if that calendar,
Class that Monday and Tuesday, the 5th and 6th. 13th works.
Gets
The
pretty
7th?
late.
We could do
13th
Wednesday.
is getting kind of late, I think.
Yeah,
what?
we could do the 7th.
7th would be all right.
We have a range meeting in here. I do that one, so I can tell you this room's,
All afternoon.
usually from about 1 to 4. Well, 1:15 we meet, so we can all have lunch, anyway.
What about the Wednesday before July 31st?
That works for me.
I think somebody was out all week.
Oh, like on that whole week? Okay. And the week before Dan's gone, okay.
I'm gone from the 21st to the 3rd.
And how about the 5th?
Now, that Thursday, the 8th, we could do,
Yep.
because it's not board or anything.
I could do that.
8th works.
Oh my gosh, we found one, okay. We better hurry up and pencil that in. Okay.
Send an email to
Dan,
April right now.
if we push out till August 8th, do you, like, what would you start on first in the new fiscal year?
That's really up to you guys.
And actually, there would probably have to be something outside of finance. I don't know which departments are gonna be like,
That property tax.
The property tax one.
okay. That sounds good. I just wanna make sure there's.
Because it's
something
one we've
like-
already agreed to, it's one we've already agreed to, so.
And we've gone back and forth on cyber. I think that's a key one. That kind of depends on, yeah.
We were trying to let Eric get, IT get, again, all the systems running. We're trying.
Okay. Yep, Thursday, August 8th, not October, August 8th at 1 PM. That is the next audit committee meeting. Number 7, public comment. Public is invited at this time to comment on any matter that is not specifically included on agenda as an action item. No action may be taken on a matter raised under this item of the agenda. So there's no public, hearing none. And with that, we are adjourned.
Of everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Bye.
Hey, Michael.